Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to day 4 of Strategic Cereal Farm Results Week. Today's webinar, we're looking at cultivations and soil management. So my name's Emily Pope. I'm Senior Knowledge Transfer Manager at HDB, and I'm joined today by two Strategic Cereal Farm hosts. We've got David Aglen, who's our Strategic Farm Scotland host, and David Miller, who's our Strategic Farm South host. Today we're going to be looking at the baselining results from our Strategic Farm Scotland. So we're joined by Paul Hargreaves from SRUC, who'll be talking through those. And we're also going to be looking at our Strategic Cereal Farm West trial results. This is a 3-year cultivation trial, and Damien Hatley from ADAS will be discussing those results with us today. So just before we start, a short bit of housekeeping. You're all on mute, so don't worry, we can't hear you and we can't see you, but we do want your interaction and participation today. So please use the question box, which should be on the right-hand side of your screens, to submit any questions, comments or points that you want to raise, and we'll discuss them and try our best to answer them. So we are scheduled to be here until 2 o'clock, but that obviously depends on the number of questions that we get and where the discussion goes. So we'll do our best to keep it going. There are basis and Noroso points available today. If you've already put them into the registration box when you registered for this webinar, you don't need to enter them again. But if you didn't have them to hand and weren't able to at that time, you can put the details into the questions box and we'll get those points claimed for you. So that's name, the number, date of birth and postcode we'll need for those, please. So this session, along with all of our webinars, is being recorded today. So if you miss anything, want to catch up at a later date, you'll be sent the link to the recording at the end of the session, and you can also watch it on the HDB YouTube channel. As always, you can follow the story on Twitter, so it's #StrategicFarm, and the HDB handle is there as well. So the plan for today, as I said already, we're going to go through the results from the Strategic Cereal Farm West cultivation trial and the Scotland baselining work as well, and really encourage those Q&As and that discussion throughout. If at any point you have any technical questions in terms of the technology with the webinar itself, also just pop your question in, and we've got Maya, who's from the events team in the background, and she'll sort those out for you. So for those of you that aren't familiar with our strategic cereal farms, HDB has been working with a host of farmers since 2017 when we first launched this initiative. And the purpose of the strategic farms is to demonstrate new approaches from research in practice. So a lot of the time, the research projects that we work on are done on small scale replicated plot trials. The aim of the strategic farm is to roll them out across our host farms using commercially available equipment. So we're looking at field scale trials, replicated tramline trials and large plot scale trials. And the purpose of this is really so that we can see how these systems, how these new approaches work at the farm scale, but we also look at it from a cost perspective, so down to the cost of production, so you can really test out these new approaches. So I want to introduce you to our first strategic farm host for the day. So I will hand over to David Aglen, who's our host up in Scotland at Balbirnie Home Farms, and David's just going to talk us through an introduction to the farm there. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we need to look at the HDB map. We're based in Fife in central Scotland. And we'd have a look at the map that's just been posted up, because the dot is quite a long way from where we actually are, but we can sort that. We are a mixed farm of approximately 1,150 hectares, as it suggests there. The arable portion of the farm is mostly combinable cropping, of which we grow winter wheat, winter and spring oats, and spring barley. We have grown oilseed rape in the past, and we had another dabble again this year. But it interferes a bit much with the brassica vegetables in our rotation for the time being. We have 22 hectares of cropping, which is used solely to provide cover crop seed to grow on the farm through the winter and the following summer. And we offer 90 hectares of vegetables and potatoes. There's also a carrot crop in there as well. Some of this land is rented out to third parties, and some of it we grow the crops in our own right. We also now have a similar area of summer cover crops and kale for wintering cattle outside on, and the balance of the farm is made up of 320 hectares of grass, which varies from young blaze right through to pasture up on the East Thomond Hill. So it's a big area, but it's a very varying quality. On top of that, we have 400 hectares of forestry, both deciduous and commercial conifer cropping. Next slide, please. So today we'll talk about our journey so far. I came here in 2010, and when I first saw Sandy, the ploughman at the time, turning over the first sod, that harvest, I thought I'd kind of landed in heaven. What lovely soil we had. And then came along 2011, and it was the wettest year since records began, I think, from memory. And then 2012 came along, and it was even wetter than that. And so by the time we got to 2013, our soils weren't so lovely. Something had to change. We had we had the area of roots and vegetables was double what it is now, at least. And so it was quite tight in the rotation, great for money, but as far as the soil is concerned, it was just sick of it. So we knew we had to change something. After a bit of cajoling of dealers and manufacturers, we managed to get a direct drill demonstrator up here, and we were able to use it on the 1st of November, which, yeah, didn't fill us with a huge amount of enthusiasm at the time, but we tried it, and the following year we harvested the crop, and to our surprise, it was promising. So we were glad with that. We then carried on more demonstrations for the next year. It got better a bit. We started dabbling with cover crops. They were pretty big failure to start with, really. We just didn't understand enough about what we were looking for, what conditions we needed to get good establishment, and we'd be chasing the combine up and down the field with a seeder by this time, and we still weren't getting good establishment. But we've learned a lot. You know, we now know that we need fertility. It kind of highlighted in hindsight how inherently infertile our soils had become. They produce very good crops when you chuck a lot of fertilizer at them and chuck a lot of pesticides at them, and that's great. But once you start trying to look at an alternative way, the kind of truth was borne out, unfortunately and embarrassingly. So eventually we took the plunge, and in 2016 we bought a direct drill. Next slide, please. Simply because we thought trying them was fine. There weren't really any people with them up here. We had hired from a near neighbour of ours for a bit. So the opportunity to try them was very limited. So it was like, well, the only way we're going to learn and teach ourselves this is to just we'll take ownership of a bit of equipment, and we can work away with it and see how we can improve the business and the soil as a result. So since 2017, we've increased our area of direct drill cropping. We've also been managing to reduce our fungicide and fertilizer usage. We've started dabbling a bit in some biological products, rightly or wrongly. I think the jury's out whether they're very effective, and trial data seems very hard to come by. But it's not been a disaster. The health of our soils really has become what caught our focus and attention within the farm. Hence the big reduction in the veg crops. We've had to kind of readjust to cope with that on a financial footing. But you can see the benefits in the soils, and some parts of the farm we've just said, right, we just can't grow veg there anymore. We're just not going to go near it, and we've seen those fields improve the greatest, I would say. Along with that, we now cover crop as much as we can. Just about the whole farm this year is either got a cash crop for the following harvest, or has cover crop growing in it for the winter. And it really has been a wonderful autumn. Guys in the south have had a terrible time, I think, earlier through August and September, and we had a wonderful harvest, and we were able to sow our cover crops when we wanted, and it really is shown out in the result. Perhaps it'll be back to reality next year with a more typical season. The net result of this, of course, is we now need a bigger drill. The picture on the right there is completely historic. We haven't had that for a few years now, so thank goodness, because we're just covering, basically sowing the farm 1.5 times in a year. The problems we've had regarding the direct drilling, the biggest issues we've come across really have been the vegetable root crops in the rotation. The damage to soil is enormous, as I've said already, and we find that it takes a good number of years before we get back to the soil back to any condition where it can be reliably drilled without major cultivation. And so part of our thing from now on, if we go to the next slide, please, is to consider what we do with these crops in the future. Do we continue with them? Can we adjust to manage without them? The diet from Balbirnie would be rather limited thereafter. We could have some meat, some porridge, and plenty of whiskey, which might be good, but I don't think it'll do my liver much good. So we've got to think again. So where do we go in the future? Well, we're concentrating on the basics. As some of the work that Paul Hargreaves will talk about in a while, we've identified that there's a bit more compaction about the place than I had realised. We thought we had a handle on it, but it seems the soils are very delicate, and doesn't take much to compact them. So we are considering a move to controlled traffic farming system, which a few years ago I thought was outlandish, but now I think it may be the only way to proceed up here. We want to continue our good progress that we've made with direct drilling and cover cropping and better biology. Really starting, there's so much more knowledge out there that we didn't even have 5 years ago, or wasn't accessible easily 5 years ago. How better understanding of the soil biology, how it interacts with the plants and the crops, and how basically it's a very symbiotic relationship, and we're basically feeding both, and we need to look after both to get the best performance from our biggest asset, which is our soil. We're continuing to reduce fungicides. Last year we only used one fungicide on wheat. We didn't use any on oats, any on spring barleys. And whilst the yields were not fantastic for us last year, I think that was more to do with lack of rain and heat than that, I would suggest. We did have a field where we did use a full fungicide program, and it was matched we managed to match it in other fields where we didn't use fungicides. So happy to push along that route. We're also moving the livestock around the farm more. We're putting livestock in fields that haven't had livestock for decades, and that has opened up another question. I think we probably need more. Do we need more livestock on the farm? I think the reality in the long term for fertility reasons is probably yes, although it goes against the fashion of the moment of having less meat. But I think in reality here we need a lot more. 200 cows and calves is not a lot for nearly 3,000 acres really to spread fertility around. I would really like to solve the vegetable and the root conundrum. As I said before, the diet would be very bland without them, and we do need them. They're good for us. But I think the way they're grown now, certainly in this country, I don't think it's sustainable. I think the soil, it just can't handle it. And it would be very nice to try and find a solution to this that allows us to keep these profitable and useful for the diet crops in our rotation. But it's beyond my abilities at the moment. And as a result of all this, agriculture I'm finding is more enjoyable. There's much more to learn, much more to read, much more interest. I find it's much more enthusiasm about it than I had when all we did was listen to the agronomist, apply 2 litres of that, spend a fortune, and we might or might not get a result. So there we go. It's more enjoyable, that's for sure. Anyway, that's brief, but that's all I have to say on where we are just now at Balbirnie. So, thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, David. We've had a couple of questions come in, but I think what I'll do is save them until we've had a look at some of your soil results. So yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on now to our next strategic cereal farm host, I'd like to introduce you to David Miller, and I'll hand directly over to you, David, to talk us through your slides.
Lovely, thank you, Emily. Yeah, my name's David Miller. We're now the Strategic Farm for the South, and it's just a little bit of the story about where we've come from over the last probably 12 years, something like that. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Emily. Okay, so that's just an overview of what we're doing down here. We're sort of collaborative farming enterprise, so there's 3 farms which altogether amount to about 1,800 acres. We're in mid-tier stewardship on all of those acres, and we're trying to use that in a positive way. So we have some heavy bits of ground which we've put into AB15, the 2-year legume option, which we've just come out of the first one and going into the second lot now, which seems to be working very well. All of our cover crop ground is all in mid-tier as well, so we're getting paid fairly good money for that. And we also have wild bird mixes in there as well. Yeah, very simple system that we run, so not much in the way of machinery, and not much in the way of sort of full-time employment. We have a couple of guys we bring in busy time, spraying and combine driving, that sort of thing, but very simple system. Yeah, next one, please, Emily. Yeah, so we have been using cover crops for 11 years now, tinkering around for the first sort of 5 years, and then getting serious about it after that, and we're now in our 7th year of zero till. Soil type down here in Hampshire, we're sort of fairly light loam over chalk, but we do suffer with a lot of clay cap and also an awful lot of flints. So we're very abrasive soil, all grade 3. And the picture you've got on the screen there is a field of spelt wheat that we've put in this year after beans, and that really is to try and show you that the tram lines have been in that field now in exactly the same place for 7 years. We've never lifted them, we've never done anything to them, and thank goodness we've got RTK on the sprayer because we can't find them. So the soil has been recovering from those tram lines year on year. So we don't see any tram lines in these fields at all from compaction or anything like that. The crop just grows straight across them. Next one, please, Emily. So the drill is the last thing you should look at with all of this. When we first looked at making the most of cover crops by going to zero till, this was sort of 2014, the machinery that was available then was not as varied as it is now. We ended up buying a cross-slot drill from New Zealand, which we've used successfully for 6 years. Up until this time last year, we had that one, and that was able to put down solid fertilizer down the spout as we drilled. We soon realised that by going to zero till, we were not managing to mineralise any nitrogen, and to go cold turkey into zero till from even min till, the crops will struggle in the autumn to get away. So we had long discussions with the Environment Agency and ended up getting a derogation because we're in NBZs, so we got a derogation to use DAP down the spout, which we started off using about 120 kilos of DAP, and we then got down to about 50, and this year we're not using any DAP at all. We think we've kick-started things within the soil enough, so we're trying to feed some biology in there. Here we go, the next one, Emily, please. So this is where we've ended up this year. After looking at several different drills, we've ended up with the horizon. This has the facility to put liquid down the spout with the seed, and also there's 3 hoppers on there. So we're hoping that's going to be a very much more versatile drill for various things that we want to try in the future, and what we're doing now. The last slide, please. So what are we looking for in the future? We're looking for lower fertilizer input. We've gone some way to getting that. We haven't used any potash for 7 years, and we're still seeing good indices, which we're putting down to cover crops, which have been in the ground several times in a 10-year rotation. So we're seeing some benefits from that, making stuff available. So no potash. We've only put the small amounts of phosphate down the spout that we've been using with DAP, but that's now stopped, so we'll be interesting to see where that goes. And nitrogen fertilizer, we've reduced that by across the farm 25%. So some of that is through actual putting less on each crop, but some of that is through changing the crop and to require less nitrogen fertilizer. Pesticide inputs, where part of what we're going to be trying to do with the strategic farm is look at how the soil health affects the plant health, which can then affect the fungicide requirements. Healthier environment, we are finding a much healthier environment. We're finding a lot more bugs and beasties and bigger things around that we hadn't seen for a while, and we just think that's a good sign for a better environment across the whole farm. One of the things we really want to achieve is to get our soils functioning without any chemical or mechanical input. So getting soils in the right place so that we can not have to have any cultivation at all. The only cultivation we have at the moment really is a straw rake. We have some fields, as I say, that we've been putting into AB15, which the ones that are more reluctant to succumb to zero tillage. Increased margins. It would be very easy to put in there maintain yields or increase yields, but it goes beyond that, and it's definitely we need to increase margins. If that means accepting a slightly lower yield, then so be it. And the last bit, we're hoping that we can prove that we can have better nutrition within the crops that we grow if we grow them in this way. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, David. I've got a question here for you specifically. I did have it and it's just moved. It was around, so David, as a no-till arable system with significant cover crop strategy, how reliant on glyphosate and other herbicides are you?
We are reliant on glyphosate, definitely. When we started having issues with supply of glyphosate this autumn, we sat down with the agronomist and long discussions, and there are ways that we could get around it. We do try and kill some of the cover crops with rolling if we get enough frosts. I think if needs must, we would be able to have a good stab without glyphosate, but it's too easy with it at the moment. So herbicides is something we haven't been able to really reduce that much at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. That's great. So now that we've got to know our strategic farm hosts a little bit, we've got 3 polls that we're going to be asking for our audience now, because we want to get an idea of some of your own experiences. So the first poll is asking you about your primary soil management strategy. So I'll just launch that now, and you should be able to select one of the options on your screen. So select from direct drill, shallow non-inversion, deep non-inversion, inversion plough or other. So I can see that we've got some of the results coming in. We'll just give people a few more moments to complete it. Okay, and I'll go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and close that poll, and I should be able to share the results with you so we can see. So you can see here we've got, I think the majority of people, so 42% of people that replied is shallow non-inversion less than 10 centimetres. And then inversion plough at, I think it's 28%, and we've got direct drill at 12%. So I think it's just, you know, it's interesting for us to get to know our audience a bit, and also, you know, to see if some of the results that we'll be sharing with you today might support some of the decisions, future changes that you might be considering. So our next poll is around how often do you look at crop rooting during the season? So this is something that Damien's going to be talking about when we think about cultivation and the impact on crop rooting. So again, same thing here, just select one of the options. So regularly, sometimes, only when I suspect a problem, or never. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, and we'll close that poll and share the results with you. So 49% of people said sometimes, 27% regularly, 20% only when I suspect a problem, and a few never. So hopefully as we show the results from the Strategic Farm West trial, might give you some hints and tips as to how you could sample your crop rooting and what kind of characteristics you should be looking for when you do that. And then our final poll is to ask you, what is your main soil challenge? So do you have, obviously I think, you know, it's fair to say there can be lots of different challenges, but what would be your primary challenge that you face on farm? So is that topsoil structure, subsoil structure, soil organic matter, or soil nutrients? Okay, so the votes are coming in. Give you a few more seconds for that one. So I'll close that in 3, 2, 1 and share the results with you. I think we've got a good range here, which is great. It's quite evenly split, isn't it, there between all four. And again, hopefully the results that we're going to talk through now might give you some idea as to some of the, you know, the results that we've seen on our strategic farm that is dealing with probably all of these things. We've got results across this whole spectrum of parameters. So hopefully that will be interesting for you. Right then, moving on. Thank you very much for doing that. It's always hard on webinars when we can't see who our audience is to get a bit of an idea about you. So moving on, I'd like to introduce Damien Hatley from ADAS. So Damien's been working on our Strategic Cereal Farm West trial, and I'll hand directly over to you, Damien.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Damien Hatley, crop physiologist with ADAS, and I'm going to be speaking about the cultivations trial. So first I'll describe the trial itself and talk a bit about sort of yields and soil health, and then I'll come on to the impacts of the cultivations on rooting. So the objective of the trial was to test the extent to which cultivation systems can be used to improve soil health and promote improved rooting at depth. And this sort of trial, the idea of this trial draws on sort of two previous studies. Emily, next slide. First was by sort of White and Kirkgard in 2010, and what they found was that 85 to nearly 100% of the roots below 60 were all found in biopores and cracks, which just highlights the importance of maintaining natural pores. Picture there shows a sort of a wheat root using a channel created by the previous lucerne crop. So to reach deeper soil depths, wheat roots are depending on exploiting these cracks and fissures, and they're created in a number of ways, Emily. By deep burrowing earthworms, obviously previous deep rooting crops, shrinking and swelling of soils, sort of wetting, drying, freezing, thawing. So in this trial, we're particularly interested in looking at reducing cultivations to encourage earthworms and maintain the continuity of the existing subsoil pores. Next slide. So the sort of second study that's relevant to this was an AHDB student report, and they found that wheat root systems were not optimal for acquisition of subsoil water, and this was due to excessive root growth in surface layers and insufficient roots below 40. We can see the sort of current situation in rooting. If you go through a couple of clicks, Emily, so we can define a critical root density for sort of efficient uptake of water, and this is round about 1 centimetre of root per centimetre squared. And what sort of Charlotte White did was looked at data from the 70s and 80s and found lots and lots of roots in the topsoil, and we only got below this critical critical root mass at over 80 centimetres deep. But when we looked at, or when she looked at crops from 2007 to 2013, the amount of rooting was much less. So on most soils, on a lot of soils, by the time we reach 40 centimetres depth, the roots are very inefficient for water. Carry on, Emily. And that's just the range. So we found some soils that were sort of struggling to get efficient water, even in the topsoil. Next one, please, Emily. So the cultivation trial itself, this started in autumn 2018, and it's on a poorly structured sort of, it's a combination of soils, so it's poorly structured, medium heavy clays and red marl. Put poorly structured in there because it's a sort of the type of clay that doesn't shrink and swell and restructure easily. So it's sort of one of the worst soils we could have for low and no-till. So 3 cultivation depths of 5, 15 and 30 centimetres in 2 replicates. Those are the strips in blue on the right-hand side. And then the direct drill was added in autumn 2019. In terms of cropping, we had winter wheat, which was drilled in autumn 2018 and in 2020. In 2019, the Oilseeds rape crop failed because of the wet weather, and that was replaced by spring beans. Next one. So in terms of cultivations we used, the shallow cultivation was a verdostat carrier, 5 centimetres deep, shallow springtime in front of drilling, and then a horse sprinter drill. For the min-till, which is the normal farming operation, we used a discarator with the same drill. And the deep cultivation, we also used a discarator, but 30 centimetres this time, which, because of the heavy soil, that was only achieved in 2 passes. So it's sort of a very intensive cultivation rather than plough. Next slide, please. And this is just a graph showing cumulative rainfall from August for the 3 years, and it sort of illustrates the abnormally high rainfall in autumn 2019. You can see from the the bars in green, that we had double the normal rainfall between September and December in that year. And this has had a large impact on the trial, which I'll discuss later. Next one, please. So in terms of emergence and population, this is data for 2021, so the year's just gone. Emergence was much higher for direct drill and 5 centimetre treatments, and this is something we commonly see, and it's generally due to more moisture in the seabed. However, the overwinter survival tends to be less, just because the soils are more difficult to establish into, but we ended up with roughly even populations, maybe slightly less on the direct drill. In terms of oilseed rape, the crop that didn't make it in the end, the emergence was much quicker for the direct drill and 5 centimetre treatments. So at 3-leaf stage, when we measured population, the deeper treatments were still emerging, and so you can see that in the blue lines. And then the rains came and they brought the waterlogging with it. So our populations at 5-leaf stage were pretty abysmal for the deeper cultivations. Next one, please, Emily. You can see just what effect this had. The plant on the right is from the direct drill treatment, so that got established and away before the rains came. That tiny little speck on the left, that's from the 30 centimetre treatment, and basically it was totally waterlogged, didn't make it. The plant, if you look at the roots on the plant from the direct drill treatment, you can see that it sat in water long enough so that it was on the way out anyway. So we decided to move to spring beans on that one. Next, please, Emily. In terms of wheat yields, these are just the yield maps. You can see 2019 on the left. There's very little visual difference between treatments, and you can see a big red crescent, which is low yielding, which is a big area of heavy clay in the middle of the field, and this sort of dominated the yield. On the right hand side for 2021, you might be able to vaguely pick out some more blue in the deep cultivations, sort of surrounded by the yellow and green. Next one, please, Emily. So this is, on the right hand side, is the yield map for the spring beans. You can see we obviously got fairly low yields. The first thing you can see is that heavy clay in the middle, which yielded next to nothing. Beans obviously less able to cope with strong soils, so you might expect a difference with the cultivations here. You can see at the bottom of the 15 and 30 centimetre cultivations appear much bluer, and this shows up on the left. And an NDVI image from June, you can see both 30 and 15 centimetre treatments have much higher NDVI than the others. And the next, please, Emily. In terms of actual yield in winter wheat in 2018-19, yield the control, which is 15 centimetres, yield 11.57, slightly less with the 5 centimetre cultivation, and significantly less with the 30 centimetre cultivation. Spring beans, 2020, you can see that the yields were higher in the sort of deeper cultivations, but because of the variation within the field, we couldn't get any statistical significance from it. In the winter wheat in 2021, yielded 10.92 on the control treatment, roughly the same with the deeper cultivation, and less on both direct drill and 5 centimetres. If you flick through the next three, I think it is, Emily. So 2018-19, soil was in good condition, yield lower on the 30 centimetres, which may have been the effect of deeper sort of overworking the soil. We did see reduced rooting at depth, but whether that's a cause and effect, we don't really know. 2020, that followed the waterlogging in autumn 2019, so the soil had slumped dramatically, and as beans are quite sensitive to strong soils, we got lower yields from the direct drill and 5 centimetres. 2021, significantly lower from direct drill and 5 centimetres again, but sort of the level of about half a tonne. Next, please, Emily. Now these the soil health scorecards from 3 years. So 2019 top left, 2020 we did the health scores in the spring because it was far too wet to get out in the field when we'd normally do them, and then 2021 top right. So as a general field, soil organic matter is slightly low. We could do it being up to sort of about 5 or 6 ideally. pH, obviously it's an alkaline soil. Extractable P and K, they're okay. Magnesium on the high side, so might interfere with potassium uptake, but not a serious concern. VES score, so the lower the score, the better the structure of the soil, and Paul will be talking more about that later. We saw worse soil condition in the 5 centimetre treatment. Bulk densities in the first year were very similar, and earthworm numbers are very low. We'd be looking at earthworms per pit of around about 8 rather than the 2, 3 and 4s that we got. Next, Emily. So in terms of differences, in terms of nutrition, we saw that the phosphorus obviously decreased in the 30 centimetre treatment, and that's through sort of bringing up the subsoil and dilution. Next, Emily. In terms of bulk density, now this is just sort of in the top 5 or 10 centimetres. It was sort of interesting to see that that was consistently less than the other treatments, which does make you think there may be some sort of resilience there. And next one, Emily. And the really interesting bit is the effect of the waterlogging on the soil bulk density, massively increased. So soil in very poor condition, and with the 5 centimetre treatment, this carried through to 2021, where cultivations and time just seem to have rectified some of the problem. So what I'd probably put this down to is the fact that we use quite sort of heavy discs for the 5 centimetre treatment, and in the end I think they're actually causing more damage than good. Next please, Emily. So in this study we're particularly looking at earthworms. I've already sort of said that the numbers of earthworms were very, very disappointing. There's no real difference between treatments, but most of the earthworms we saw were juveniles anyway. What we're really looking for is the deep burrowing earthworms, and these were hardly present in the trial at all during the 3 years, and completely absent from the 30 centimetre cultivation. And next one, Emily. VES scores, we sort of saw them in the tables, tended to be slightly better for the direct drill treatment, but not significantly so. But it's quite interesting when you plot the two together, we get a good relationship with earthworm numbers and the VES score. So we're sort of seeing that earthworms basically prefer better structured soils. Next please, Emily. And well, the other thing we did as well was look at carbon stocks after 3 years. So that's sort of after 2 years for the direct drill. Carbon stocks were in the area of sort of 60 to 70 tons per hectare, and the top 60 centimeters, that's the blue bar. The profile distribution was fairly similar. Direct drill, maybe you could sort of, I mean, there's no statistical significance, but maybe you could say it looks slightly different in its distribution. But I suspect that's down to the location in the field rather than any real effect at this stage. And you'd probably need to retest to see what's really happening. Positive thing is that we have sort of, we did macerate the soils to 30 centimeters, and we haven't lost any carbon. Next. So generally lessons learned. Well, cultivation should be appropriate to the crop type and soil conditions. So we can see that peas needed the cultivation more than wheat. Positive changes in structure and biology are slow. We were hoping this would run on for at least 5 years, and we might see a bit more then. But the negative changes, particularly due to the weather, were much quicker to take effect. And soil variation within the field can be large. We saw that with the clay area in the middle affecting yield. So what's good for one part of the field might not be for another.
Brilliant, thank you, Damien. Okay. That's great. I've had a question come in about the protocol that you're using for sampling the organic carbon stocks, and whether you could just elaborate on the protocol that you're following. So how did you sample for organic carbon stocks?
Well, we actually we sampled 25 cores to the particular depths. I'm not an expert on the analysis, but Paul can tell you later. Okay,
that's great, thank you. Okay, I was just going to bring David Aglen and David Miller back in here, just for your reflections really on some of the results that Damien's just presented. So if you can switch your cameras back on, that's brilliant. Just in terms of, you know, what you found. So David Miller, if I start with you, obviously one of the lessons learned that Damien's highlighted is the positive changes in structure and soil biology are slow. What were your experiences?
Yeah, definitely very slow. I think if people want to see these things and find a result after a year, that's not going to happen. I mean, we're 6 years into our 7th crop of no-till, and the soils have really started to change massively in the last couple of years. And that's a lot of that is down to the number of worms we're finding. So the whole of the surface of the ground is just covered in worm casts, so that's having a big effect. Yeah, I think one of the lessons we learned is you've got to have your soils in good condition before you start. If you've got any problems, you've got to rectify those problems, and that's probably one of the things that I would take away from Damien's presentation is, you know, having 2019 in there is a bit of a curveball. I mean, we do see wet years, especially in the first few years of no-till, as being you know, very critical. Whereas once you're there and you've sort of got a few years under your belt, you can take a year like that without the problems that they encountered.
Brilliant, thank you. And a question for you, David Aglen, about, I mean, Damien's highlighted some of the differences in soil texture across the field, and you could see that interaction with some of the different cultivation systems that we were testing there. And we've had a question come in for you. In your opinion, how well suited is the soil series that you're on to min-till being used consistently across the rotation over many years, because it's a coarse textured sandy clay loam with imperfect subsoil drainage?
Good question. I think I'll tell you the conclusion we've come to here on the farm is that we've either got to turn the soil over and start again every year, in which case the worms and whatnot just have to lump it and that's it. We get the mineralization of nutrients and that's what gets the crops and so on and so forth. Or we just got to leave the soil alone and move it as little as we can When we've tried min-till, it seems a bit hit or miss. Sometimes it looks like you've done a wonderful job and the seed bed's fantastic and the seed goes in well, but you just find that you've just put that, as Damien alluded to earlier, you just put that little pan in there a couple of inches down, and if the weather goes against you, it becomes a bit wet or a bit dry, and when the seedling root hits that, you're just scuppered. So yeah, I think it's very important. The soil is, you've got to work with what you've got in terms of depth and timing of cultivations, but in our experience, it's all or nothing. It's either completely cultivate it with a plough or just leave it be. And as David Miller says, that as time goes on, you do see the structure come in, and you do find it much easier and easier to get good establishment and respectable crops at minimum cost.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in. So Damien, just final one to you for now, and then we'll try and come back to some of the others. You mentioned that the crescent shape that you could see in the yield map. Using the analysis, is there any way of excluding that to see if it affected the differences in winter wheat harvest 21 yields between the different treatments? So could you take out that factor of the soil type maybe?
Well, the soil type factor is taken out by the agronomics analysis. We did an analysis where we just sort of physically took the data out, but we also used the agronomics analysis. What that does is that measures the variation within the actual treated area and compares it to the treatment next door. So it's a sort of a boundary line analysis. So that actually takes a lot of the variation out.
Brilliant, thank you.
So the yields we're given are modelled yields. So they're different to the yields that we would have got if we'd put the whole lot over a weighbridge. So we're compensated in that way.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so moving on then. Damien, if I hand directly back to you, and you're going to take us through some of the routing data that you found at Strategic Farm West, please.
Yep, okay. Ready when you are. I want to go to the first slide. So we did two assessments of routing. We did a sort of a simple assessment in growth stage 30-31, and then we did sort of do deep rooting at anthesis. These are some plants from 2021. On the left-hand side, it's the 30 centimetre treatment, so the deep till, and on the right-hand side, it's a direct drill. So on the left-hand side, just looking at the roots, there's plenty of them. They're well spread. They're generally quite deep. But if you move to the right-hand side, you can see that the direct drill produced a sort of less uniform condition, so we get quite a bit of variation between the rooting. So the left-hand plant of the three has obviously found a nice fissure to go down and concentrated the roots in that way. The middle one, not good rooting conditions, so not that many roots. On the right-hand side, it's hit something sort of fairly solid, which has stunted the roots altogether. And what it's done is it's tried to create lateral roots to keep itself going, but wouldn't be much at harvest. Next one, please. But because we're scientists, when we do these experiments, we have to have numbers for things. So we've got this shovelomics methodology, which I think was originally done at the University of Nottingham, and it's a way of defining root architecture, so we can look at physical effects on how that changes, which is particularly appropriate to cultivations. So we do a number of sort of simple measurements. So we do sort of the nodal length to the left, put the plant sort of on a table, do the nodal root to the length to the left, nodal root length to the right, maximum width, depth to maximum width. From that, we can get a sort of a numerical picture of what the plant's like. We had things like sort of root numbers, branching density, And an important one is the sort of the angle of the root, which is in the dotted line, and that's sort of compared to it's an angle from what would be the soil surface. And in the first part of the presentation, one of the papers said that, you know, if that angle's greater, then the roots growing more vertically downwards and will produce more roots at depth. Next one. So when we applied these sort of measurements to a number of plants from each of the treatments, we can sort of get this idea of how the roots are behaving. Tiller numbers are obviously very important because the size of the root will depend on population. If there's more tillers, there's more root. If there's less population, there's more tillers. So there's a sort of interaction there that we have to take account of. Maximum width in centimetres. This was greater for the direct drill and 5 centimetres treatments. Normally we'd expect a good rooting system to have a high maximum width, but in this case it was caused by the roots spreading out over a pan. Root maximum depth, these are significant as well. Again, you can see in the direct drill and 5 centimetre treatments, the roots were restricted. Branching density, I sort of mentioned before, in the direct drill, restricted roots, they're trying more laterals to survive. And then we have the convex hull, which is a sort of an estimation of the total root area of the system, you know, how big the root system is. And we saw differences there in the, as we did sort of expect, direct drill and 5 centimetres had a much smaller overall root system. And I've got a sort of diagram explaining that on the next one. Next slide, please. So in year 1, we found this, oh, back one, please. In year 1, we found associations with the root angle and the root length density and root biomass in the subsoil. In year 3, so it's the second weed crop, we weren't quite so lucky, and largely I think this is because we're working on a different scale. After the soil slumped, we've got a lot worse soil structure, so we couldn't pick out the sort of the smaller differences we did in year 1. Next slide, please. So on the left, that sort of describes what we're talking about when we're calculating convex hull. So it's sort of the total area of the root system, how much, it's an estimate of how much soil the root system is actually in contact with. And when we plotted this against yields, we got a very good relationship, as you'd probably expect. Smaller root system, more yield, but it does highlight just how important roots are for those of you who don't bother to look. Next one, please. The other thing we measured was soil strength. This is related to rooting, so the less the soil strength, the more easy it should be for plants to root. And this was done through penetration resistance. This obviously increases with depth, but it's very moisture dependent. So year to year variations can be quite significant. So don't sort of put too much emphasis on the data here. We did see sort of high values in autumn 2020, which are probably the result of clay dispersal during the waterlogging in the autumn. So definitely a stronger soil, less structure. And you also know most of the 50 centimetre profile has a resistance over 1 megapascal. And this is sort of generally thought as the area where you start to get restricted root growth. So it's not a nice soil. We get a little bit more information if we actually compare the treatments to the 15 centimetre treatment. So On these charts, the 0 is where the 15 centimetre treatment lies. So anything to the right is a denser soil than the 15 centimetre, and anything on the left is a looser soil. So if you can highlight, please, Emily. So in autumn 2018, left-hand side, as we'd expect, the sort of 5 centimetres treatment was denser than the 15. So we've caused an increase in density there. 30 centimetres also was maybe due to a bit of overworking. In spring 2020, so this is after the soils were waterlogged, so we've got a sort of deterioration in soil structure. We'd expect the direct debit, the direct drill and 5 centimetre treatments to increase in strength, and we saw this, but we also saw it with the 30 centimetre treatment. So it did nothing to actually alleviate the damage, and probably because it was sort of over cultivated, it was worse than the 15 centimetre treatment. However, in autumn 2020, I've mentioned before about the 5 centimetre treatment, and maybe we're doing more damage than good. So we've gone through another round of cultivations then. You can see the increased density in the 5 centimetre treatment, but if you look to the left, then the 30 centimetre treatment has obviously undone a lot of the damage that the previous winter did. So as David said, you know, sometimes you've got to go in there sort of full whole hog and rectify the situation. Rooting at depth. The first thing you'll notice is I mentioned this 1 centimetre per centimetre cubed as a sort of critical value. This particular site, we're well below that in both years. The sort of 2019, which was a good year. In that year, we found the relationship between rooting and root angle, which related to yield. But in the second year, we've still got that yield relation, but we had sort of thought that maybe the direct drill would sort of the stronger soil with the direct drill would sort of point the roots downwards, and we'd end up with more in the subsoil. But in actual fact, the condition of the soil wasn't good enough for that sort of thing to happen. The compaction basically sort of overrode any of the niceties of root architecture in 2021. So we saw more rooting at depth where the soil had actually been cultivated. Thank you. So lessons learned. So again, positive changes in structure and biology are slow, negative changes quicker. Cultivation is appropriate to soil conditions, and I've added use appropriate kit. Don't underestimate the value of drainage for soil structure. Maybe with better drainage we would have avoided some of the knock-on effects. And the other thing, sort of more for researchers, is as plant roots are sensitive to condition, can we actually use simple rooting measures to inform cultivation strategy? Because they're quite a fine indicator of what's happening in the soil.
Brilliant, thank you, Damien. I think you've just touched on it. We've had a question come in. How important is drainage to the soil characteristics that you've described? And I think based on your lessons learned, quite important. Extremely. Yeah.
It's one thing that people forget about until it happens.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to keep moving because I'm conscious of time, and I know that we've got lots of questions that we want to cover at the end. So thank you very much, Damien. And I'm going to hand straight over to Paul, who's been working with David Aglen up in Scotland. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for coming along today. Yes, I've been dealing with the farm in Scotland, and this is just the first year of taking samples from the farm. So unlike the farm that Damien's been presenting the data from, I haven't got a series of years showing any changes there. But really, we're just looking to see what we've got at the moment in the fields that we're interested in, and just trying to benchmark those soils against potentially each other, but just to lay down a baseline that we know we can work from. There's also other work carrying on the farm that may have interactions with the soil health. So there's been other baselining data being collected from the farm in this first year, including pests and crop health. So next slide, please. I just thought I'd give you an indication of the baseline measurements that we've taken. These are all related to the AHDB scorecard that's been developed and promoted, with a slight emphasis on Scottish soils. There's some differences there that we need to be aware of, that Scottish soils are different to, in some cases, to English and Welsh soils. So, but without dwelling too much on that, they're basically the three components we're now thinking about as far as soil quality is concerned. The soil chemistry, that probably that people are more familiar with, the nutrient levels within the soils, and always importantly, the pH, the soil biology, soil organic matter, the mineralizable nitrogen, the biomass, which is more of a lab-based analysis of the overall activity within the soil there, and also using earthworms from the soil block. And then we were thinking about the soil physics. We did look at moisture holding capacity, infiltration rates, but it's the kind of penetrometer, bulk density, and the visual evaluation of soil structure, the VES system that was developed in conjunction with SRUC, which is a visual survey of the top soil within your field, and also you can attribute a score to that as well, to see how well or poor the soil structure is at the time. Next slide, please. And we did this sampling in a number of fields across the farm. They were initially assessed for soil texture, and I think this is really important when you're doing baselining, and also understanding soils on your farm, has been alluded to already or stated by the other presenters, that different fields with different soil textures can react or need to be managed in different ways. So it's really important you understand what you're dealing with there, from a light sandy loam soil to a heavier clay soil. They're going to react differently and probably need different management and problems and advantages that you need to be aware of there. So we took the fields, we looked at a priority sampling zone within those fields, generally either the larger area or an area of concern within the field, and then we did all the sampling within a set point within the field. And that was marked with using GPS, so we can return to that part of the field again. And we did the soil visual soil structure assessments, and took topsoil samples from there, as well as doing some penetrometer measurements. And this was the rotations for the fields that we were interested in 2021. There was bottom strip that had, I mean, they all seem to have different kind of tillage. I think depending on what the crop rotation had been and what the problem potentially had been trying to be addressed within the field there, and also had been parts of different rotations. And I've highlighted this because I really wanted to see where there was cauliflower or kale or the carrots. How far after that did we still see some kind of potential problems that they might have put into the into the soil itself, be it through taking up nutrients or through soil structure. And then the last two fields were just cereals, so as a contrast to those. The next slide. If you just press twice, I think. So these are the first two fields here, showing the results that we got, similar to what Damien showed with the kind of traffic light system, showing things that were within what we wanted them to be as far as green, and highlighting things of concern or ones that we may need to look at again in a bit more detail at in the amber colours here. We did do the sodium analysis, which is part of the scorecard, but as far as arable crops are concerned, probably doesn't reveal a great deal that you need to do about that. I think here, even though these were two fields that had recent either root crops or probably more difficult tillage, as it were, it was I think as David Aglen alluded to, that they'd been concentrating a lot on the nutrients and the nutrient inputs, and this is reflected in the scorecards that we're starting from here. But it's the indications of the soil structure through the earthworms and the visual evaluation of the soils and the penetrometer and bulk density that's showing their areas of concern and potentially are the limiting factors here as far as the soils are concerned. Next couple of clicks, please. And probably just go for the final one as well. I think that's all the fields. Yeah. So again, with the Tank Wilson field, it came two seasons after the carrots, but there's also a cover crop involved there. So again, using the use of cover crops and David's understanding of those now is really useful. I think that's been beneficial as far as the field's concerned. It's probably put a bit of structure back into there, put more organic material in there. It's been more useful for the earthworms to encourage the earthworms as well. So again, it's really down to just some of the soil structure there. Again, with horsepack, which has been in, there's some issues there with some of the nutrients, and it'd be probably useful to have a look at those. But again, it's the soil structure that probably would be drawing your attention and having a look to see what could be done there to improve that. And again, with Castle Park, it's a third rotation in a cereal, and showing a lot more positive across the whole board there. But again, it's trying to think about the nutrients there and just getting those up to the required levels. Next slide, please. I've just thought I'd put these slides in. There's three of these just showing three of the fields. There was some precision pH measurements done on blocks within the field, and just really showing what the short scorecard said. Is showing that it was 6.1 for that field, but there are probably some areas there, if you do go down the precision analysis route, that you could do some more varied spreading there to try and hopefully save on cost of your lime. And it's just a strip at the end really that's probably needs to be onto the left hand side and in the middle that needs to be concentrated with your liming. Next slide, please. Again, this is 5.9 from the scorecard, and really indicating that the majority of the field could probably benefit from amount of lime being spread. There's no real areas there of high pH, and then there's on the left hand top corner is an area of probably would be even more beneficial to add your lime there at 5.7. So again, just thinking about the kind of variation in pH across the field. And finally, next one. And again, this one, a very good field, really. It's not needing much lime, if any at all, but it's just, and it's pretty uniform as well, which is also interesting to see. If you do pH and liming, on a more regular basis and know where the troughs and peaks are across the field, and hopefully concentrating on those can help get a more uniform field for the whole of your pH. Next slide, please. I just wanted to say something about the vest. This is something we encourage people to do, and it really is just a block of soil being dug out with a spade width, spade depth, and just opening that block up and having a look to see the structure, with the finer structure and the detail across the top down to the poorer structure and the larger blocky aggregates down at the bottom. And this should help lead on your management, what you've got to do as far as tillage is concerned, and also looking to see where the worst area is within that block. So that can give you an indication of depth of tillage as well that you may need. Next slide, please. So this is just some examples from a couple of the fields there. Castle Park field there, which is a relatively good structure. There's some blocky material a bit further down, so that might be interesting to make sure there's an eye kept on that, to make sure that doesn't develop any further. However, the Treaton field, especially in this area, which I think was near some of the wheelings, it shows that that probably would benefit from a lot more structure being put into that soil there. Next slide, please. And just trying to see if there's any indication of soil structure and earthworms. We see here the higher the bar on the VES graph on the top there is, the worse the soil type is, and then the higher the bar on the earthworms is showing the higher earthworm numbers. And there is some agreement there, but Treaton seems to not really follow the pattern too much, and but Castle Park, which we were saying that had really the best soil structure, it does show the largest numbers of earthworms. Next slide, please. And there's a bit more detail here. It's not always the total number of earthworms. Sometimes it's more can be revealed by the number of juvenile earthworms against the number of adults, because you tend to find you do get juvenile earthworms in areas that still show quite a bit of compaction within the soil, but you don't get many adult earthworms. So again, Treaton, which was showing the poorer soil structure, has got a lot of juveniles, but the number of adults is not as great as, or just the same as the Castle Park one there. But Tank Wilson and Horse Park, I've still got a lot of juveniles, again, maybe to do with the cultivation techniques that have been used in those fields, especially with Tank Wilson. Turning over and breaking up the soil tends to break up the habitats and reduce adults as well as juveniles in that situation. So next slide, please. These are just the yield maps, quite detailed, that David provided for the different fields there, and we shows the areas within the fields that are showing a variation within the field of the different yields there. And again, this is an indication potentially of slightly differences in soil type, or changes where there's been more movement across those fields, or turning areas. So hence there could be lower yields around the edges of those fields there. But we use some of this data. Next slide, please. To look at some of the yields. I mean, this is difficult to get this from these particular fields because they may have different parts in the rotation and different yields year on year. So basically, and this was just the first year that we were doing this analysis. So basically, I just compared the overall yield for the field or the overall yield for the priority zone against a national, Scottish national average for the crop that was being grown in 2021. And some of these were pretty close to what you were hoping it'd be, or there wasn't a great deal of reduction. However, next slide, please. When I plotted the percent reduction in yield against the Scottish average, which is on the y-axis, against the VEST score across the bottom there, where the increasing VEST score really showed a greater reduction in yield for these crops, showing that soil structure is probably the limiting factor in these crops at the moment. So something that really should be focused on as far as trying to improve the yields. And I think that's next slide. I think that's the last one. Yes, thank you very much there.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Paul. That's great to see those results, and great to see some data coming out of the strategic farm within the first year. So I'm going to go straight into questions now. So if everyone wants to put their cameras back on. The first question is for you, Paul. For precision applied lime, what is your recommendation for target pH?
Well, according to the SAC technical notes for Scotland, we would be aiming for 6.2 for grassland and 6.4 for arable. Now,
Brilliant, thank you.
I know some people disagree with that and are a bit tighter and maybe just go for 6.2, but I think those are good levels to aim for.
Brilliant, thanks. So question for David Aglen. With veg and potatoes in the rotation, what is more important, soil structure or balancing having that high value cash crop in the rotation?
I think historically it was cash. The way we're moving now, and particularly having gone through those results, I think it's becoming more apparent, because obviously there's more history I understand about the fields than was obvious there, that the veg and the root crops are doing a huge amount of damage to our soils. You could almost correlate the time, because every one of those fields that Paul was talking to has had roots or veg of some description in the last 5 years, and you kind of correlate the soil structure. The worse the structure, the closer it was to, or the least time, the closer it was to where the veg has been, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So the best structure field has the longest time since it was veg or root. And that's, 4 years is a long time. That's a good way through the rotation. So I think the long-term answer is that it's not sustainable with them in the rotation. The cash has to get an awful lot more, or we just have to wait bye-bye to them.
Yeah, another question here, I think probably leads on from that. Does rotational ploughing, even every 6+ years, take us right back to the beginning?
I don't know. I've asked that question to lots of people and nobody's given me the answer yet. I think it gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling because you get a good crop, because you mineralise a lot of the nutrition, and your crops look fantastic, and they probably yield very well for that season. But I think the structure just disappears. And I think once you're in the cultivation cycle, you just got to keep cultivating. Like I said earlier, it's all or nothing, I think.
So we've got an interesting question here, and obviously when we think about cultivation, the other side to it is traffic management as well. And David Aglen, you've already mentioned about controlled traffic farming. And we've got a question here, which I'll just read out. Have we reached a stage where machinery and axle weight of machinery, combine, trailer and tractor weight is limiting production and full yield potential by causing compaction by moving on the land when the subsoil is beyond the plastic limit? So David Miller, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think axle weights and that are becoming too high for a lot of this stuff. I think some work done, I think it was by ADAS a number of years ago, looking at the weights that are available to put across a field without doing serious damage, actually, if you move your organic matter levels up, you can take a lot more weight across the field without doing the damage. So we're sort of in a spiral of removing the organic matter and increasing the weights, which is having a big issue. But we haven't gone down the CTF route. We felt that actually we maybe have caught our soils in time, that it's not, and also we don't go on the fields when they're wet, so that's not really been an issue for us. But I know there are a lot of people around that are very much looking at CTF as a way out to increase the productivity on the bits in between.
Yeah, and I think the two are inextricably linked. We know if you move to reduced tillage and direct drilling, the percentage area of the field that you traffic in a year reduces. So in a conventional system, that could be 80+% of the field has a tractor tire, if not once, you know, up to 7 times, if not more. And move to a direct drill system like you've got, David, and that comes down to, you know, 30%, I think is in the data. So the two are inextricably linked, aren't they? Another question for you, David Miller, then. Someone's asked, I thought the cross slot with inverted T was the best opener. Why move to the horizon drill?
Certainly in 2015 it was the best drill. On our particular soil type, we had issues with our stone content, where the cross slot puts the seed in deeper than, the disc goes in deeper than where the seed is put. We were having problems where the coulters were riding out and seed was being left on top. The cross slot is an extremely good drill, and we have no qualms about saying that, you know, we had 5 good years with it, but our soils have moved on and we are able now to move on to something slightly different.
Brilliant, thank you. Probably a question for David Aglen, because I guess this is a challenge that you'll have. Is earlier drilling a requirement for direct drilling or no-till establishment?
In the autumn, yes. I mean, I think you can get around it by cranking up your seed rates in the autumn ridiculously high compared to a conventional system. But we've started moving our drilling much earlier. It's a very tight window for us up here with the harvest day, but we've put some stuff in mid-August this year, and it certainly appears, I wish I could do it all like that, I think. But we just put the seed rate up later to compensate for the lack of tillering to get around it. In the spring, it's a different scenario potentially. A lot of guys talk about waiting till the soil warms up and conditions are nice for the seed to come up and just to shoot up and never stops. We've been really patient with that over the last few years and had very variable results. And starting one of the trials we've got in next year is looking at different sowing dates for spring barley under a direct drilling system, because I'm slightly wondering whether we're missing a bit of tillering time with the crop by waiting probably 2 to 3 weeks after we could maybe be trying to put it in. So with the jury's out in the spring, in my mind, but certainly in the autumn if you can get it in earlier. But then if you've grass weed issues and whatnot, then there's 101 other reasons why you maybe shouldn't be drilling earlier. But maybe a good rotation might help sort that. David will have more experience of that, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Go on, David Miller, what are your thoughts?
Exactly the same reasons you're saying, David. It's if you've got weed issues, that's the biggest thing that stops you from going early. But definitely, if you drill in good conditions, especially with a serious disc drill, it's head and shoulders above trying to muddle stuff in later on.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm conscious of time. We have got some more questions. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that these questions are put to our panelists and circulated so that we answer all of them. But for now, I'm just going to move through to some final points. So if you have got any questions about anything that we've spoken about today, about anything across our strategic cereal farm programme, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. You can contact myself or my colleague Fiona Geary and we'll be more than happy to help you. This map here just shows the range and distribution of our host farmers. So not only do we work with our strategic cereal farm hosts, but also our monitor farm hosts. So hopefully you'll be able to find somewhere that you can visit and a program that you can get involved with close to you. If you want to find out more about when these events are happening, please visit the HDB website. You can find all of the events listed there on the events portal. If you've got any questions, if you're based around the country in any of the regions, then your first port of call is always your regional knowledge exchange manager. Their contact details are on the website as well. So any questions about benchmarking groups or monitor farms or anything to do with HDB, please get in touch. Just a heads up of some upcoming events. So it's the National Agronomists Conference taking place on Tuesday, the 7th of December. That's taking place in person at Peterborough, but also online. There are limited number of spaces available for the in-person event. So if you do want to be there in person, then please head to the HDB website and book on as soon as possible before they run out. The online registrations will continue, so you can join online. Then what we do is take the Agronomist Conference on a roadshow around the region. So if you aren't able to attend on the 7th of December, you can catch up with the latest HDB research results and updates from across the technical programmes at an event near you. The dates are listed there and all the information is on the website as well. So we've got one webinar left for Strategic Cereal Farm Week, and that is tomorrow, same time, 12:30 till 2. Visit the same HDB website to register for that. We're also recording a podcast with all of our host farmers, and that will be released next week. If you haven't been able to attend any of the events that have happened earlier in the week, as I said at the start, all of them have been recorded and you can catch up on them after by visiting the HDB YouTube channel. Here you can find a whole library of recordings of events that we've done over the last 18 months. You can imagine there's been quite a few, but there's lots of different topics, lots of different videos that you can catch up on there. So all that leaves me to do is say thank you very much to everyone for dialing in and attending today. Thank you for your questions. It helps keep it lively and interesting. Thank you to our researcher speakers, to Damien and Paul, and thank you very much to our farmer speakers, David Miller and David Aglen. So thanks once again, and I hope you have a really good afternoon.